Good morning, everyone. Our opening hymn this morning is Love Will Guide Us, number 131 from Singing the Living Tradition. Please sit back and enjoy the hymn.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hot night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hot night.
Good morning. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Alec Peck, who will be singing our hymns. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. We invite you to leave your worries and defenses at the door and trust that what happens in worship is inspiring and powerful. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser as we begin a new day and a new week. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are here, please socially distance. We can speak in normal tones, but singing or chanting creates an increased risk of airborne exposure. So we ask you to refrain for the time being. We invite those of you in the sanctuary to sit back and enjoy listening to our hymns. For those of you at home, sing your hearts out. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. For our call to worship, you're welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. Our speaker today is UUCR member Tinka Friend. Tinka Friend is a longtime member of this church. She is a docent of our church and interested in its history, as well as the history of Unitarian Universalism. She is a retired school teacher, and in 2015, to honor the 50th year anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery, she and her husband, Nick, made a 2-month trek across the South, visiting all the civil rights museums in 4 states, including the memorial to Viola Liuzzo outside Selma, Alabama. It was then that Tinka became determined to learn more about her. March is Women's History Month, when we celebrate the contributions women have made and the achievements women have made over the course of American history. Today's sermon highlights the American Unitarian Universalist civil rights activist, Viola Gregg Liuzzo. Viola Gregg Liuzzo, a maligned and forgotten hero. How committed are we to our faith, to our beliefs, to our values? How far are we willing to go to ensure not our own rights, but someone else's rights? These were serious questions to people of many faiths during the 1960s civil rights struggle. Some of them were brothers and sisters of our own faith community. Viola Liuzzo was a Unitarian Universalist and the only white woman to be martyred in the civil rights movement, and yet many people have never heard of her. In honor of Women's History Month, we will learn her story. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous peoples' remembrance candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land, who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first a sacred space of several groups of Indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Clipeño, and the Serrano. We, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside, light the sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is We Light This Chalice by Marianne Moore. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. Thank you, Bill. We have a tradition here at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I'll now ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here a while to tell us your name and how you found out about our church. We ask you to step close to the mic and speak into it directly and clearly so everyone can hear. Do we have a volunteer today? Bill? Thank you, Bill.
This is since most of the faces that we have here are pretty familiar, I guess this goes out to any new people we've got out in cyberspace there who are watching the service. I'm Bill Casey, and I first ran into this place back in the 90s. There'd been a drum circle here. I'd had a change in my particular faith, moving from a Christian tradition to one that was more centered on the earth faiths, paganism, Wicca in particular. And there'd been the drum circle, and it was a beautiful time. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed to have that. But afterwards, as we were all packing up, I'm looking around at this Norman Christian design to everything. And I'm thinking a little bit about the people who ran it. It is very easy to love someone if you are essentially looking at a clone of yourself. What's not to like, right? But these were people who could say, you know, I think you've got this, and this detail really wrong. This one seems irrelevant, but I like you and you're walking towards the light, same as I am. Lock the joint up. Don't leave the fridge open. We love you, and we'll see you. We'll see you on Sunday. As I said, loving a clone is one thing. Loving somebody who's honestly a different soul than your own is. You want to keep track of people like that in your life and be as close to them as you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, and that's how it's done. If you are new here, a visitor, or an old friend, please raise your hand to stand up and come to the mic in front of the pulpit. Online. There's a face out in the audience who we haven't seen for a while that we're really happy to see today. Hello, Fern. Welcome it back. So, all right. So for any other new guests, please join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service. We'd love to chat with you out in the parish hall, where you can also find our visitors book. Please leave your name before you leave so that we know you were here, and leave your contact information if you want to know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. There are a few announcements we'd like to share now. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. Joys and concerns. Sharing joys and concerns is one of the most important rituals in our community. An opportunity to share milestones, losses, achievements, and experiences with one another. Now that our doors are open again, on the first Sunday of each month, we can both hear from those in the sanctuary and read the contributions that were received. In front of the pulpit, there is a book where you can write your joys and concerns, over there, joys and concerns, whenever you are here in the sanctuary. For those of you at home, you can send your joys and concerns throughout the month to uuchurchofriverside@gmail.com. Our next Joys and Concerns will be on April 3rd. Camp Connect Workshop. UU Principles. How do they go beyond an ideal? Camp de Benneville Pines invites you to a virtual experience called Camp Connect Workshop. UU Principles, how do they go beyond an ideal? This is a series of workshops that will be held at 5 p.m. on 4 consecutive Sundays in March, the 6th, the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th. We will focus on 2 UU principles each week. Workshops will be presented by Zoom and facilitated by our camp dean and professional facilitator, Amy Brunel. Today, UUCR will be streaming the 3rd installation of this series at the Church Annex at 5 p.m. if you wish to share the experience with fellow congregational attendees. Our annual pledge drive for the 2022 and 2023 fiscal year will begin with a wine and cheese event next Saturday, March 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. So mark your calendars. All members and friends are invited. I'd also like to add that we enjoyed a delicious St. Patrick's Day dinner last night in the parish hall and extend our thanks to all those who contributed to this event. Now we have a few announcements from the Social Environmental Justice Committee. The ICUC food drive. UUCR is partnering with Inland Congregations United for Change as they hold their Riverside Food Drive. Donate non-perishable items in the box in the parish hall until April 15th. The Social and Environmental Justice Committee meeting is today in the annex at 12 noon. You can find the Zoom link and more information on the website under Social and Environmental Justice. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may also contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the church website and also in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value, and the church also receives a percentage. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity. And to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Dinah is signaling to me that today is the bake sale, as it's the third Sunday. So everybody knows what to do. All right. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn is From You I Receive. Please sit back quietly and enjoy.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Now I would like to introduce Tinka Friend, who will lead the meditation and then speak to us on the sermon Viola Gregg Liuzzo, a maligned and forgotten hero. Tinka?
The reading that I have for our meditation comes from Reverend James Luther Adams, and he was a Unitarian parish minister, a social justice activist, author, essayist, an editor, and a divinity minister for more than 40 years. And in fact, he was really the most influential theologian among the American Unitarian Universalist within the 20th century. So this is taken from, adapted from one of his essays. I first would like to take this stone and put it in the water, basically to represent the sacrifice, the souls and the sacrifice of two Unitarians who in 1965, during this month in Alabama, from Selma to Montgomery, that gave their lives. So these two rows represent them, Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo. And I've chosen 5 smooth stones. This stone embodies our living tradition. We are always learning new truths. We're always growing in knowledge. And revelation is never sealed. This stone embodies that we are a free people, gathering in free will in a spiritual journey together. This stone embodies our call to create a just and loving world, to work to abolish oppression in all of its forms. This stone embodies that good things do not just happen, but instead that we work and sacrifice to make those things happen. And this stone embodies our knowledge that there are spiritual and human resources for the achievement of meaningful change, which justify an attitude of ultimate optimism, embodying us with hope. And let's just meditate on those words for just a moment. How committed are you to your faith, to your beliefs, to your values? How committed are any of us? What are we willing to do? Are we willing to speak up, even when we know we will be ridiculed or maligned? How far are we willing to go to ensure not only our own rights, but the rights of someone else? These may be hypothetical questions to us sitting right here, right now, but they were serious and real questions to people, Black and white, of many different faiths during the 1960s. And some of them were brothers and sisters of our own faith community. I want us to realize, those of us who are call ourselves Unitarian Universalists, and realize that the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America consolidated together in 1961 in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement. This newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association was not quite 4 years old when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sent out an urgent telegram to its Boston headquarters on March 7th, 1965, asking religious leaders and concerned citizens to join him in Selma, Alabama, where African Americans who were marching for their right to vote had been brutally attacked by lawmen. That, of course, was Bloody Sunday, when an attempt to march from Selma to Montgomery was violently stopped just over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Two of the Unitarian Universalists who responded to King's appeal paid with their lives, and in a way that few deaths ever do, the murders of the Reverend James J. Reeb and Viola Gregg Liuzzo helped to change the course of history. Viola was the only woman to be martyred in the civil rights movement. In honor of National Women's History Month, I will be focusing on Viola's story. If you want, I can tell Reverend Reeb's story at another service. Viola was a child during the Great Depression, and her family descended into poverty. They moved through Georgia and Tennessee looking for work. They lived in one-room shacks with no running water. The school she attended didn't have enough supplies. And because her family moved so often, she never began and ended the school year in the same place. She finally dropped out of high school after only 1 year. Having spent much of her childhood and adolescence being poor in Tennessee, Viola experienced the segregated nature of the South firsthand, and she questioned the fairness of it even then, as a child. And I believe that this had a powerful impact on her later activism, as did her strong-willed nature. Viola's family eventually moved to Michigan. Detroit was starkly segregated by race, and there was a very high tension between the blacks and whites, which led to violence and rioting. Witnessing these horrific ordeals was a major motivator that also influenced her future civil rights work. She married a teamster and was the mother of 5 children. She enrolled part-time at Wayne State University, studying nursing. When she went back to school as a high school dropout, a working-class housewife and a mother, she publicly protested the attitude of the great majority of men who held the conviction that any married woman who was unable to find contentment and self-satisfaction when confined to homemaking displays a lack of emotional health. In 1964, she began attending the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Detroit, where many members had been freedom riders in an earlier struggle for desegregation of public transportation. And she joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. And a large part of Viola's activism, particularly with the NAACP, was due to her close friendship with an African-American restaurant worker, Sarah Evans. After initially meeting in a grocery store where Viola worked as a cashier, the two kept in touch. Sarah eventually became Viola's housekeeper while still maintaining a close, friendly relationship in which they shared similar views, including the support for the civil rights movement. In fact, in the aftermath of Viola's death, Sarah Evans would go on to become the permanent caretaker of Viola's 5 young children. When speaking of her friend in a later interview, Sarah said, "Viola Liuzzo lived a life that combined the care of her family and home with a concern for the world around her. This involvement with her at times was not always understood by her friends, nor was it appreciated by those around her." Viola so passionately believed in the fight for civil rights that she helped organize Detroit protests, attended civil rights conferences, and worked with the NAACP. She had a strong desire to make a difference on as large a scale as she possibly could. In addition to actively supporting the civil rights movement, she was also notable for her protest against Detroit laws that allowed for students to more easily drop out of school. Having been the recipient of a poor education herself, she was deeply troubled by this. Her disagreement with that law led her to withdraw her children from school in protest. And because she deliberately homeschooled them for 2 months, Viola was arrested, but she did not waver. She pleaded guilty in court to bring attention to that and was placed on probation. In Alabama, following the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson during a demonstration, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference scheduled a protest march for Sunday, March 7th, 1965. Governor George Wallace banned the march, but the ban was ignored. 600 marchers headed for the arched Edmund Pettus Bridge that crossed the Alabama River. As the protesters reached the crest of the bridge, they looked down and saw the terrifying sight on the other side. State troopers armed with clubs, whips, and tear gas, and a sheriff's posse on horseback. When told to stop and disperse, the marchers refused. The troopers advanced on the marchers, clubbing and whipping them, fracturing bones and gashing heads. 17 people were hospitalized on that day, which was later called Bloody Sunday. Watching at home on her television, Viola was horrified by the images of that aborted march. A second march took place 2 days later. Troopers, police, and marchers confronted each other at the county end of the bridge. But when the troopers stepped aside to let them pass, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. knelt and prayed, and then led the marchers back to the church. They didn't march forward. He had decided to obey a federal injunction while seeking protection from federal court for that march. That night, a white group of men beat and murdered civil rights activist James Reeb, a Unitarian Universalist minister from Boston, who had come from Selma to march with the second group. Many other clergy and sympathizers from across the country had also gathered for that second march. When Viola watched the news of the death of a minister of her own faith, she knew she could not just sit at home. She had to do something, and she wrestled with what that something should be. 5 days later, she took part in a protest at Wayne State and then called her husband to tell him she would be traveling to Selma after hearing Dr. King call for people of all faiths to come and help, saying that the struggle was everybody's right, everybody's fight for rights. After sitting her children down and explaining what she had to do, she left her children in the care of family and friends. Her friend, Sarah Evans, promised to take care of her children if anything were to happen to her. Viola contacted the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and asked if she, her car, and her nursing training could be of any help to them. They took her on and tasked her with delivering aid to various locations. She was welcoming and recruiting volunteers, transporting the volunteers and the marchers to and from airports, bus terminals, and train stations, for which she volunteered the use of her car, a 1963 Oldsmobile. She drove to Alabama, and during the week that she was in Selma, she stayed with Willie Lee Jackson, a Black mother who was raising 5 children also, and they discovered they had a lot in common. On March 21st, more than 3,000 people began the third and final march, including Blacks, whites, doctors, nurses, working class people, priests, nuns, rabbis, homemakers, students, actors, and farmers. It took 5 days of walking for the protesters to finally reach their goal, which was Montgomery, the capital of Alabama. Viola marched the first full day, and then she returned to Selma for the night. That Wednesday, March 24th, she rejoined the march 4 miles from the end, where a Night of the Stars celebration was held with performances by many popular entertainers of the day, including Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Joan Baez, and Dick Gregory. Viola helped at the first aid station. On Thursday, she and other marchers reached the state capitol building, which had a Confederate flag flying above it. Dr. King addressed the crowd of 25,000, calling the march a shining moment in American history. After the march concluded, Viola, assisted by Leroy Moten, a 19-year-old African-American high school senior, continued shuttling marchers and volunteers from Montgomery to Selma back and forth in her car. Remember, they had walked there, so they needed rides getting back. As they were driving along Route 80, a car tried to force them off the road. After dropping passengers in Selma, she and Leroy headed back to Montgomery. Low on gas, they stopped at a local filling station where they were subject to abusive calls and racist scorn. When Viola stopped at a red light, a car with 4 members of the local Ku Klux Klan, which included an FBI infiltrator, pulled up alongside her. When they saw a white woman and a black man in a car together, they followed her as she tried to outrun them. Overtaking the Oldsmobile, they shot directly at Viola, mortally wounding her twice in the head. The car veered into a ditch, crashing into a fence. Although Leroy was covered with blood and the bullets missed him, he lay motionless when the Klansmen reached the car to check for their victims. After the Klansmen left, he began searching for help and eventually flagged down a truck driven by a minister, Reverend Riley. Like Leroy and Viola, Reverend Riley was shuttling civil rights workers back to Selma. Leroy was immediately whisked away for fear of his life and did not resurface until he testified at the trial. He didn't even show up for his high school graduation ceremony, nor did he ever return for any high school reunions. Upon hearing of Viola's death, the entire nation, including Congress and President Lyndon B. Johnson, were saddened but also outraged, and the historic Civil Rights Voting Act of 1965 was quickly passed by Congress and signed into law by President Johnson. Viola Liuzzo was initially lauded as a courageous hero and civil rights activist by the press after her death. However, sympathy and goodwill for her and her family quickly evaporated. Within 24 hours of her assassination by the Ku Klux Klan and the FBI informant, Gary Thomas Rowe, who was in the car, J. Edgar Hoover began a smear campaign to the press, to other FBI agents, and to select politicians, mainly Southern, claiming that the cut marks that were on her arm from the car's shattered windows were actually, and this is quote, puncture marks in her arm indicating recent use of a hypodermic needle. Another quote, she was sitting very, very close to that Negro in the car. And that it has the appearance of a necking party. These were actual quote unquote facts written into the FBI file on her death. Insinuations were leaked to the press that she was sexually promiscuous, she was a drug addict, she was an unfit mother who ran off and left her husband and 5 children in order to carouse around with black men. Just 3 months after her death, the July 1965 issue of the Ladies' Home Journal published a poll that asked if readers thought Viola Liuzzo was a good mother. Just 3 months after her death, after this smear campaign, 55% said no, they did not. I feel sorry for what happened, one woman in a focus group convened to talk about the Liuzzo story said, but I feel she should have stayed home and just minded her own business. Viola Liuzzo was condemned by different racist organizations for having brought her death upon herself. At the time, her choice to immerse herself in such a dangerous undertaking was seen by some as radical and controversial. However, of all the deaths to occur during the civil rights campaign, Viola's was the only one scrutinized in such a way where other male activists who were killed were immediately recognized as heroes. Less than 2 weeks after Viola's death, a cross burned in her family's yard in Detroit. They had bricks thrown through the window. They received so much hate mail that the post office had to stop delivering their mail. On their way to school, her daughters had rocks thrown at them by adults. The children were teased and bullied at school and heard terrible things said about their mother. The years of unrelenting accusations, innuendos, and lies took a tremendous toll on the lives of Viola's family and her 5 children. The FBI was concerned that they might be held accountable for their informant's role in Viola's death, so they took control of the narrative immediately. They attempted to obscure the fact that there was an FBI informant in the car. They did not want the FBI to be held responsible for permitting their informant to participate in violent acts without FBI surveillance or backup. Gary Rowe had been an informant for the FBI since 1960. The FBI was aware that he had participated in acts of violence during numerous Ku Klux Klan activities for several years, and they had kept him from being prosecuted many times. Some of these activities that he had been involved with in the past included organizing and participating in the Freedom Riders attacks in 1961. And he played a role in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham in 1963, which killed 4 little girls and blinded a 5th. On the day of Viola's death, prior to the shooting, Rowe had called his FBI contact and notified him that he and other Klansmen were traveling to Montgomery and they had planned violence. During the investigation, the FBI, who took charge of the investigation immediately, did not test Rowe's gun or the bullet casings for his fingerprints. Autopsy testing showed no trace of drugs in Viola's system and that she had not had sex recently at the time of her death. The FBI's role in the smear campaign was not uncovered until 1978, when her children obtained case documents from the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act. They had filed a $2 million wrongful death claim against the FBI, charging it with failing to protect her and withholding information from the family about the FBI investigation of her death. After 6 years, a judge rejected the claims in the Liuzzo family lawsuit, stating that there was no evidence that the FBI was in any type of joint venture with Rowe or conspiracy against Mrs. Liuzzo. Rowe's presence in the car, in fact, was the principal reason why the crime was solved so quickly. In response to the verdict, their lawyer said, "This is a terrible opinion. I am shocked and I think this is incredible." 2 months later, the family was then ordered to pay $79,873 in court costs to the FBI. The costs were later reduced down to $3,645 after the ACLU appealed on behalf of the family. After being maligned and then forgotten for several decades, Viola Liuzzo finally started getting recognized and honored, and more people became aware of her life and what had been done to her after her death. In 1991, the women of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference honored Viola's sacrifice with a memorial marker on Highway 80 at the place where she was shot and died, 20 miles east of Selma on the way to Montgomery. It states, "In memory of our sister, Viola Liuzzo, who gave her life in the struggle for the right to vote, March 25th, 1965. Almost immediately, it was vandalized, and it frequently had a Confederate flag painted over the words. Finally, a protective fence was erected around it. And this is how it looked when, when Nick and I went and visited. In 1998, a critically acclaimed biography titled "From Selma to Sorrow, The Life and Death of Viola Liuzzo" was written by author and historian Mary Stanton. Last year, it was adapted into a movie and it is available on Amazon. In 2004, Viola was the subject of a documentary, Home of the Brave. In 2015, in Detroit, Viola's family was given a hero's welcome on the 50th anniversary of her death. She received the first posthumous honorary doctorate degree at Wayne State University, where she was a student. The Viola Liuzzo Playground Park near her home in Northwest Detroit was rededicated in her honor. And among the many events was a celebration of her life at the Unitarian Church, which is on the Wayne State University campus. In 2019, the Detroit Playground and Park bearing her name was gifted with a statue showing Viola walking barefoot on the way to Montgomery carrying her shoes. It has been a difficult road for her children as they have struggled to vindicate their mother's image from slander by the FBI. She prepared us, her daughter Mary said. It was the way she raised us. Thank you, Mom. You loved us enough to fight for a better world. Thus ends the life and the story of Viola Gregg Liuzzo, a maligned hero, but forgotten no more. Now, what about us? What are we doing for our faith? We never know when we might be faced with a hard choice of sacrificing for our faith, for our beliefs, for our values. What will we fight for? What are we each willing to sacrifice for a better world? Our closing hymn is number 108, My Life Flows On, an Endless Song. This is an early Quaker song with an American gospel tune. I chose it specifically for that third verse. The third verse was written by Doris Plenn during the McCarthy era, when those who refused to sign loyalty oaths often sacrificed, they lost their jobs, or were jailed for contempt of Congress. Those in the sanctuary, sit back, close your eyes, and listen quietly.
My life flows on in endless song above us lamentation. I hear the real, the far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What through the tempest round me roars, I know the truth it liveth. What through the darkness round me glows, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost core, while to the track I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both near and far, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When funds by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Our benediction today is a quote by Reverend James Luther Adams. A faith that is not the sister of justice is bound to bring people to grief. Namaste, amen, and blessed be.
Thank you, Tinka, for sharing your valuable time and insights and that powerful message with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again. If there are those of you who would like to stay here for a few minutes later for questions or to answer or to share some discussion or observations from the service, please remain in the sanctuary or online. For the rest of you, you are welcome to adjourn into the parish hall.
Did anyone have any questions? I will let you know that I specifically did not focus on the murderers. I wanted this time to be her time. I wanted it, so I didn't go into the trial or what happened to the people or anything else. But if you have any questions, I can certainly answer them.
I don't know if this is a question or an observation, but you'd mentioned the 55% of the people thinking that she was a bad mom, but maybe a bad person for doing what she did. And back in those days, you could sit there and say, well, yeah, truth, justice, and the American way, but let's not get all worked up about stuff. So you hid behind your orthodoxy. 55%. I am hopeful that we've got that number knocked down around 30 to about 30%, 25%. I know we're not at zero. And I know that there are people out there who believe that any element of systematic racism isn't so much systematic, but a particular person being a jerk. My question, if I'm going to make it one, is what would you call the number, at least regionally? What number would you say now we would give her? In California, we're liberal, but
That's really tough because, you know, we know what's happening now, that kind of resurgence of racism seems to be rearing its head. Misogyny is, you know, I mean, it seems now, I would have said maybe 10 years ago that it really was down, but after the last 6 years or so, you know, I don't know. I'm afraid, you know, it might actually, you know, be back up there again. I don't know.
What was the result of the trial?
They were found not guilty. They all pleaded that not guilty. I mean, they pleaded that they were innocent. The FBI informant was given immunity for testifying, but you know, it was held there in the South, and so they were found not guilty. The interesting thing, however, is that you know how when people are like with Rodney King, you know, how his attackers were found not guilty, but then what happened was they got prosecuted for violating his civil rights. Well, Viola Liuzzo was the first one that they did that for. They had just passed that federal law. And so when they were found, when her murderers were found not guilty, the federal government immediately used this new law to prosecute them. The FBI informant, of course, was not part of that. He was given immunity. By the time they went into the trial and were convicted, the other three remaining perpetrators, one had already died. The other two were both convicted and served jail time for it. But again, it was for violating her civil rights, and she was the first case for that.
How long did it take for that verdict?
How long did it take for that verdict? It was, I would say, like around 10 years or so. I mean, it wasn't like there were appeals and you know, everything like that. I don't know if any of you, when I was preparing for this, I made the suggestion a couple of months ago, and then I started last month doing my research, and everything. And so it was all focused on Viola and her sacrifice and her commitment, and what are you, it kept coming to me, what are you willing to do? And then when I started writing it, the Ukrainian situation happened in Ukraine, and it broadened it out for me a lot. I mean, here are people in Ukraine, young, old, both genders, that are taking a stand and are making sacrifices for what they believe in, for the world they want. It broadened it out for me with what's happening in Ukraine now. Well, I thank you. I know this was not like a fun, uplifting kind of a sermon, but I hope it was powerful. I hope it was meaningful. And I definitely wanted to give her her due. Thank you.